I want to start off. It sounds like you have run a lot of businesses and started a lot of businesses. Do you remember what your first was? What was your first entrepreneur opportunity?
Yeah, my first one was out of graduate school. My doctoral thesis advisor asked if I would start a company with him based on my graduate research.
What kind of research and technology was that?
So I was an analytical chemist by training and education, and we developed some algorithms and some hardware to look for signal and noise, and applied it at the time to the environmental industry because at the time the EPA was well funded and doing a lot of good things that changed a lot in the last 10 years. So by the time we were doing a lot of environmental work and some Department of Defense work and things of that nature. And that company was called Siteworks, Siteworks.
2 words?
One word.
One word.
One word. And golly, ran that for a couple of years. Then we split the company into two, and one half of the company became Ion Signature Technologies, which became a software company. And it still exists, still around. And golly, that was back in '92. So.
When would you have launched that initial company, that first company?
Around '92.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what did the other half become?
The other half was a services company, and that we essentially kind of stopped doing that. That was a grind. It was very difficult because we bring our equipment to a lot of very remote locations, and
That's labor intensive, it sounds like.
yeah, it was, and it was hard to sustain. It was hard to keep people. It was hard to it was a lot of remote work, and it was just challenging.
Now, I've read some of your stuff and interviews with you, and it sounds like you're really big on entrepreneurship as a teachable skill. It's not innate.
Oh yeah.
Why do you think people don't think of it that way?
You know, it's interesting. People romanticize entrepreneurship. They read stories about Bill Gates and others, and they think that, well, it's an innate skill, and you either have it or you don't. But what people don't realize is that, or most people actually do realize this, but some people don't realize the extent to which that is such a huge exception, not the rule. And there are also a lot of people who read the popular press, but don't read the actual peer-reviewed journals on entrepreneurship and what can be taught and can't be taught. So it is, for most academicians who, if not all academicians who study entrepreneurship, it's an undeniable fact that it can be taught. And nobody in the academic community in entrepreneurship would argue otherwise. But people who are sort of outside that academic community tend to view it as this innate skill that you must have. And the way I put it to people is real simple. What young person or burgeoning entrepreneur can't benefit from studying 100 to 200 cases on entrepreneurship facilitated by a faculty member? I mean, anybody can benefit from that if you want to be an entrepreneur.
Is that what you aim to do with your in your new position, is to kind of establish a program that walks people through these case studies, essentially?
Yeah, walk through case studies. The big thing that I want to instill here, a couple things. One is we're going to go after top ranking in entrepreneurship, and that's very achievable with what's here, the raw materials that are here. The big thing I want to do is to start, excuse me, putting in place the nuts and bolts of what it takes to really launch these companies. Because what I've seen over the years is companies don't tend to fail because of a lack of customers or because of a lack of a good idea or a saleable product or service. Companies tend to fail largely because of the small mistakes that people make along the way, that when you make enough of those mistakes, they add up to a situation where the company just craters. And those mistakes are completely avoidable. I mean, I'm talking about nuts and bolts mistakes. I'm talking about mistakes like an entrepreneur didn't know they had to file a 941 form, or the entrepreneur didn't know as soon as they start running a payroll that they have to have workman's compensation. Otherwise, you can get big fines. And they're probably, golly, last time I counted them, they're like, by my count, there are 300 small things, roughly 300 that you need to do to start a company. And it's not that people are ignorant or not smart or not savvy. It's just you don't know what you don't know. And if you don't know you have to do these things, and nobody tells you have to do these things, or you're not trained that, hey, you gotta watch out for this and you gotta watch out for that, you don't know. And so you're gonna make those mistakes. And I've seen it over and over and over and over again. I've seen cases where 3 people start a company, they don't have a partnership agreement in place because they didn't know they needed a partnership agreement. You hire your first employee, it doesn't work out. You never had an employee handbook that kind of stated what how the company is run and what they're entitled to and not entitled to, and before you know it, you're in a lawsuit. I mean, there's so many things that are so easy to overcome.
Okay.
And people just don't know they have to do it.
So, what type of ranking will you be pursuing, or through what ranking agency, I should say?
Well, we're going to start with Prison Review. We'll go to, certainly the World News Report, Forbes, those kind of areas. And it's not the ranking itself that we're necessarily interested in, it's what that ranking gets you. The ranking gets you the visibility and the notoriety to get more students involved, so that students now know this is a place to go for entrepreneurship.
And so, what has kept St. Thomas off of that ranking list, or lower on the ranking list at least in the past?
I don't know the answer to that yet. I'm actually in the middle of doing a gap analysis.
Okay.
To determine what it is that is missing, because when I look at St. Thomas, and I look at what we have here, without digging in deep, which I haven't done yet, I don't see what's missing. To me, we have the faculty, the quality faculty, we have the number of faculty, we have the number of students, we have the programming, meaning majors, minors, things of that nature. We have a lot of community outreach. Our faculty are all terminally degreed. We have tenured faculty in entrepreneurship. Golly, we have a lot of student companies launched. Obviously, we'd always like more, but even when I was at Babson, we always wanted more. and Babson's the #1 ranked school.
And was it when you were there, or did you help them do that as well?
No, I went there as a student because they were top ranked.
Okay.
And then I stayed on as adjunct for a number of years teaching entrepreneurship. Still have very good friends there.
That makes sense. What's the best way for an entrepreneur to learn outside of actually starting a company themselves?
Well, there's a lot you can learn in the classroom, for sure. There's a ton you can learn in the classroom. And a lot of it is lessons learned, mistakes people make, and that's born a lot out of case studies. It's born out of having faculty who've actually been there, done that. I'm a big proponent of having a lot of adjuncts, or golly, what do we call them here? Clinical faculty, either as a faculty member or certainly as a guest lecturer to come in and talk about experiences and what to watch out for, and how to do the right things.
Okay.
Yeah, there's an awful lot of again, nuts and bolts that people have to learn. I mean, you can't run a company, you can't start and run a company without understanding financials, without understanding accounting, without understanding organizational behavior and dynamics. I mean, these are critical skills that you need to improve your odds of success. You can be successful without it, but your odds of success go down dramatically. And then you can be an outlier and succeed. But golly, to me, entrepreneurship is all about risk mitigation. And the more you learn about all these aspects of running a company, the lower your risk of failure.
What should that being said, what do you see students who graduate in entrepreneurship from here? What should they be able to do when you deliver them to the workplace?
They ought to be able to think independently, make their own decisions, and drive toward an end goal without a lot of supervision. So I think our students largely are that. I think our students historically have had incredibly high ethics. They're incredibly hardworking, and they don't need an awful lot of supervision. And I think that is a key ingredient to being an entrepreneur.
Almost self-selecting just by virtue of being in the program.
Absolutely.
What's the best advice you've received about entrepreneurship in your career that you would pass on to students?
Yeah, so the best advice I received is to make sure that you take time out from time to time to get a perspective on things. People say that entrepreneurs need to work 80 hours a week, and that's not true. Entrepreneurs sometimes need to work 80 hours a week, and sometimes it's 20, just depending on what happens to be going on at any given time in the formation of the company. And when you have that rare week where you don't have an awful lot that you need to do, for whatever reason, you really need to take that time
Okay.
to get some independent perspective on what you've done thus far. Because you're going to have an awful lot of weeks that are 50, 60, 70, 80 hours, but it's not every week. So, take the time to take stock, maybe once a quarter, take a long weekend.
What's been your biggest success that really makes you proud in your career?
Oh, golly. Different kinds of successes, really, in terms of professional things. I was proud of what we did at Bluefin Robotics.
What did you do at Bluefin Robotics?
I was the CEO of Bluefin Robotics. We took the company from about $9 million in revenue and no profit at all, zero profit, actually arguably negative, really losing money, to about close to 18 million over 2 years, and profits of about 2 million a year.
It's not a bad profit margin.
Yeah, we're doing well, and then that's government contracting, and they really limit your margin. So we expanded out into the private sector.
Is Bluefin still around and on
Yep.
its own? Okay.
Yep.
Where are they based out of?
Massachusetts.
Okay.
Yeah. So I was proud of that one. Proud that my first company still exists, especially since we made every mistake in the book.
Well, that was my next question, actually. What has been your biggest failure, and what did you learn from that failure?
Oh, so my biggest failure, actually, after SiteWorks, and that's the company that still exists, not called Line Signature Technologies, I thought to myself, as a relatively freshly minted PhD, without any business training or education, I thought, wow, that was easy. Starting that company, doing well, great, I still have stock, it's going well. I didn't want to run a software company, so I thought, golly, I'm going to do this again. So I joined a relatively new company that wanted to get to the next level, and had worked with a team there, and I realized that it's not that easy. And that company ended up cratering. That was Target Environmental Services. Target Environmental Services. Yeah, that company didn't do well. And so at that point in time, the lesson learned there was, golly, this probably isn't as easy as I thought it was. I better get back to school to learn about business. And so that's when I looked at business schools.
And that was picking up the fundamentals that you were telling me about, the accounting businesses.
Yeah,
Okay.
it really was. People say you can learn that as you go. That's not true. Absolutely not true.
Is what cratered that company? Is it what you were telling me about? A lot of small mistakes cascading into
It really was.
a big one?
It really was. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. There's a lot of small mistakes that end up. It's very rare that you see one watershed bad decision or one watershed event that will crater something. That's relatively rare.
What makes the University of St. Thomas different than the other institutions you've been at?
So the atmosphere here at University of St. Thomas is very similar to the atmosphere we had or have at Babson College. It's very so if you break schools up into the publics and privates, the public schools, especially large research schools, tend to be driven by certain metrics that make it very difficult to implement entrepreneurship. Metrics like how many licenses did you issue, what's your intellectual property portfolio look like.
The whole commercialization.
Yeah, driven by metrics that make it difficult at times to put the right programming in place. St. Thomas is a private school, much like Babson is a private school, isn't bound by those metrics. And I'd say slave to the metrics in some respects. So we have the ability to do what's right for the students, do what's right for the community, regardless of what large research universities view as their metrics. And it breeds an atmosphere of student first, community first, the heck with the metrics, we're not chasing those, and it just gives you a lot of freedom.
How is the Twin Cities entrepreneur environment different in integrating students with that environment?
Yeah, so it's interesting. On either coast, entrepreneurship is a badge of honor. Between the coasts, there's still a little bit of an attitude of entrepreneurship is that thing you do when you can't get a job. And I would say that is largely true in the Midwest, except for areas like Chicago, areas like the Twin Cities. I would say there's a very vibrant entrepreneur community in some of the major cities in the Midwest. It's still not the coasts. There isn't as long-standing of a history of entrepreneurship necessarily. But the community that does exist, especially in the Twin Cities, is very vibrant and very supportive. And what I've seen actually in the Midwest in general, and coming from Michigan, I can say this for sure, Michigan, is the state of Michigan, and the state of Minnesota for that matter, very, very supportive. In fact, when I was in Michigan, I was shocked at how much money and support the state of Michigan is putting toward entrepreneurship, to their credit. They really are invested in reinventing themselves.
What kind of public support helps entrepreneurs the best?
Money and talent.
What does talent look like from the public?
Yeah.
How does the state provide talent?
Yeah, so it's interesting. I mentioned the coasts. In Boston, specifically where I spent a lot of time, you can't walk down the street without bumping into an entrepreneur between gigs. Somebody looking for the next gig, a talented, well-respected entrepreneur. You can't walk down the halls of MIT and not see CEO-level people looking for their next big thing. They're all over the place. These are guys and gals who are educated in business. They've had a bunch of startups. Some went well, some didn't go well. But they're seasoned entrepreneurs. Those people are a lot more difficult to find in other parts of the country. And I go back to my time in Michigan. It's hard to find those kind of people in Michigan. A lot of people in Michigan have been reared with the big three, and you go to school, you get a job with one of the big three, and you retire. And so there historically has not been a lot of that since the early days. So finding the right people to put in a company, especially in the early stages, is a challenge. And states tend to know who those people are, where they are, how you get in touch with them.
Okay.
And that's where the state can be helpful. And the other area, of course, is from a financial standpoint, is putting money to work as a state to foster entrepreneurial behavior, to foster new companies, new ventures, putting programs in place to help new companies go after the right kinds of grants, go after the right kinds of customers, attract the right kind of talent. A lot of companies that are started aren't venturable. If you look at the numbers, big mistake entrepreneurs make is they think that their startup capital is going to come from the venture capital community. That's just not true. There are, depending on whose numbers you believe, there are about 500 venture capital firms in the country. Out of those 500-ish, the last survey I saw showed that 10% claim that they do early stage investment. Early stage meaning pre-revenue companies. But when you ask them what was your last pre-revenue deal, they have a hard time remembering it. So cut that 10% down to 5%. So you go from about 50 early stage venture capitalists down to about 25 in the whole country.
Yeah, that's spread thin.
Yeah, that's not where the startup capital comes from. Startup capital comes largely from your own pocket to start, then the 3 F's, of course, family, friends, and what people politely call the fools. So family, friends, and fools. And then after that, you're really looking for grants, you're looking for state monies, you're looking for angel capital, things of that nature.
Okay.
And venture capital is typically much later on.
Talking about that talent, do you see UST increasing its number of graduates to help beef up that talent pool?
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting to me in my short time here so far. There have been a lot of big successes coming out of UST in terms of entrepreneurs. Major successes in terms of...
Who sticks out to you?
Golly, I just met a gentleman last week who was honored here. Last name Rieger, I think it is. Started an oil company in the Dakotas. Came from a family of entrepreneurs, saw an opportunity, runs a very successful company right now, and a pretty big company too. And he can't be 40 years old yet. He's got to be in
wow, that's young.
Yeah, he's got to be in his early 30s. And I've had several come through my doors. Hey, I'm a graduate. I started this company. We're doing well. Here's what we're doing. Just a lot of them, surprisingly.